Welcome to my course, Game Development Basics, Week 4, Lesson 8, Gameplay Timer. Our objectives for this lesson are to create a gameplay timer in our game mode that handles the losing condition for our game. We're also going to add a timer to the player's UI so they can keep track of how much time they have left. And then when the timer expires, we're going to end the game. And this entire lesson is going to be a challenge for you. So our challenge is to create a gameplay timer. And the requirements are that we must contain a variable to adjust the timer. We must show the remaining time on the player UI, and you must get game over when the timer runs out. If you'd like to attempt this on your own, pause the video now. Otherwise, I'm going to walk you through how I would handle this. Let's start by implementing our gameplay timer. And here I am back in the game, and I'm going to start by going to my game mode. I'm going to create a variable right off the bat called gameplay timer. And this will be an integer. And we're going to use this to keep track of how many seconds are left in the game. Let's start by giving the player 10 minutes. So we'll set this to 600 seconds. And we're going to create a function, and we're going to call this reduce remaining time. And we want to take our gameplay timer and we'll just decrement it. And for now, let's just do a print string that prints the number of seconds remaining. And off our begin play, we're going to set timer by function name, and our function name is reduce remaining time. And we'll set this to 1 second, and we want it to be looping. And if we test this, we can see that our time is ticking down slowly. But we don't want to use the print string for this. I would actually like this to be part of the UI for the player. So here in my HUD blueprint, I'm going to add a new text block. And I want to put this in the top corner, and I'll make it a little bit bigger. And I want to bind this to that variable in our game mode. So we'll create binding. And then here, I'm going to say get game mode. And we'll cast to BP game mode. And we'll get our gameplay timer. And we can take our gameplay timer and put it into this return node. And one issue with this though, is it's just going to be the integer. We can see here it's counting down from seconds. And this could be good enough for our gameplay, but I would actually like this to be in the form of a minute and second timer. So here's a little mini challenge for you. See if you can figure out a way to make minutes and seconds part of this timer. If you would like to attempt this challenge on your own, you can pause the video now. Otherwise, I'll show you how I would do it. Let's start by giving ourselves a little bit more room here. So the first thing we want to do is divide this number by 60. And because these are integers, this is only going to return the number of whole minutes left on the timer. Then we can use the modulus and divide by 60. And this will give us the remainder, which would be equal to the number of seconds left on the timer. Let's convert this to a string and then use an append node to give us multiple inputs to that string. And to start, I'm going to create 3 inputs. The first one is going to be the minutes, and then we'll do our colon, and then we'll do the number of seconds. And we can see here that that's now working. It gives us 9 minutes and 50 seconds. One issue we're going to have though is that when this gets below 10 seconds, it's not going to supply the 0. And we'll see this here. Now it's just giving us a single digit of seconds, and then it'll start over again in the 50s. To alleviate this, we actually need to check for 2 different conditions. This condition will be good when we have greater than 9 seconds remaining. However, when we get from 9 to 1 seconds, we need a second condition. We can do this by creating a branch, and if our seconds is greater than 9, then we'll continue to do that condition. But if it's less than 9, we'll need a separate return node. So let's drag off the false and type return, and we'll get a second return node. And we can copy these. And we just need one additional pin for this. So the C pin will be 9, and the A pin will still be the minutes, and then the D pin will be the seconds, which would be less than 9. And just to test this out, I'm going to reduce the number of seconds to 551. And now we can see that when it goes below 9 seconds, it'll add the 0 in there. And now we have a working timer. The last thing we need to do is set up our lose condition when the timer runs out. So here in our game mode, let's create a new custom event, and we'll call this game over. And when the game's over, what we want to be able to do is stop the player movement so they can no longer navigate the level, and then we'll create a widget that shows them game over. So let's start by getting our player controller, and we can say stop movement, and this will stop the current movement of the player. But we also want to be able to stop the inputs from the player so they can no longer move around. For this, let's go into our player controller and we'll create a new Boolean called isGameOver. And in front of all of our actions, let's create a branch that checks this. If the game is over, we want it to do nothing. And let's do this for any actions we have for our player. And now here on my player controller, let's cast a player controller, and then we'll set isGameOver to true. And just to test this, I set my gameplay timer to 3 seconds. And the last step is here in our reduce remaining time, we want to create a branch. And we want to check if this is less than or equal to 0. If it is less than or equal to 0, we want to call game over. And we can also clear timer by function name and put the name of this function in. Now when we get to 0, the timer will stop and I can no longer control the player. So our game over function is working, but we don't want our player to just be locked into the screen. We want to give them some indication that the game is over. So let's create a new widget. I'm going to call this WBP Game Over. Let's create a canvas, and on here we can create an image, and we can scale that image to the total size of the monitor and set the color to black and the opacity to something like 0.6. This will make the rest of the game look fairly faded out. Let's add some text, and we'll center our text, and we'll bring it slightly up on the y-axis. And we'll have this say game over. And so this will show the player that the game is over. The background was slightly dim and they'll see this message. We want to be able to have them be able to interact with this though. So let's create some buttons that the player can interact with. And we'll start by creating a vertical box to contain the buttons. And let's add 3 buttons. So we'll create the first one. We're going to anchor it to the center. And this first button is going to be called Restart. And the text will say Restart. Let's duplicate this button twice. The second one we'll call Menu. And for the text, we'll say Main Menu. And the third button we'll call Quit. And for the text, we'll have it say Quit Game. And you can see we have some weird behavior here. The buttons aren't matching the size. And we can fix this by taking our vertical box and just extending the size, and we'll do something like 250. And now all the buttons will be the same size. And if we want, we can also use some spacers in between each of the buttons to space them out from each other a little bit. Let's try 30 on the Y. And this menu is starting to look good. Let's create some functionality for these buttons. So if we go to our graph here, we could take our restart button and we click on our restart button. We could see on clicked and add an event. For this, let's get current level and then open level by name and just drag the current level name into the open level. This will handle the restart function. For the menu button, we're going to handle this in the next lesson, so we'll skip this for now. If you wanted to though, we can create a print string just to show that it's working. And then the last one is going to be the quit. And for this one, we just want to call quit game. So now our restart and quit buttons are set up. So here in our game over, let's create the widget. And this is going to be our game over widget. And we'll add to viewport. And then we want to set show mouse. And for this, you may need to deselect context sensitive and say set show mouse cursor, set that to true. And this needs a player controller input. So we'll say get player controller. And now when our timer runs out, the game over menu will show up and we have access to the mouse and we can click on these buttons. So if we click main menu, we'll see that it's showing our print string. We can click restart and it will restart the level. And then we can also quit game. So now we can see that our menu is working, which means that when the player loses the game, they can now choose to restart the game or quit the game. And the final option will be to return to the main menu, which we're going to set up in the next lesson.